This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast, a podcast brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. I am your host, Daniel, and I am joined by the man himself, Dr. Richard Blackaby. How you doing, Dad?
Daniel, doing well, and I think our listeners and viewers might notice that you're not Sam Camp.
I know, unfortunately, as much as I try, I continue to fall short.
Yeah, and to all of our viewers and listeners, this is the beginning of a new series going forward with this podcast. Those of you who've been listening for a while know that my son-in-law, Sam Camp, was the host of this podcast for many years. And we've transitioned him into a bunch of administrative leadership kind of roles, and just thought we'd freshen it up a little bit here with a new season and have my son Daniel take the role of host at this point. And so, Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, I should say long-time listener, first-time caller. It's fun to finally be on the podcast. I know now and then you've shared stories about me, so I figured this is maybe the only way to correct some of the lies that have been told is just to work my way as a host.
If you've read many of my books or heard me speak anywhere, inevitably you've heard a Daniel story. I've had people come up after my sermons and tell me in tears, I have a Daniel too. and so it's good to have Daniel on here. And we thought since Daniel was transitioning to this role, that it might be interesting to do a little series on family and leadership in the home. But maybe before we get into that part, Daniel, tell us, what are three things you must know if you're going to understand Daniel Blackaby?
Yeah, well, I feel like this would be an interesting question to hear you answer. We might
I have an
different,
answer for that.
different answers. I guess a couple of things about me. One, and longtime listeners can probably guess where I got this from, but huge book nerd, love books, love the dustier and smellier, the better. So definitely a big bookworm. I'm also maybe can't guess where I get this one from if you listen to the show, but a heavy metal head. I love my heavy metal music. I've been working to get my dad to listen to it for years, and I will continue to do so. Maybe the last kind of interesting thing, much to my poor wife's disappointment, is that I collect swords. I love weapons, medieval weapons. So all along our house, our walls, we got some axes, got some swords. If ever we need to defend our house, there's always thing within reach. So those are three
and you get those from,
me.
especially from Lord of the Rings. You're not just a sword nut, but a Lord of the Rings fanatic as well. So,
oh yeah, definitely replicas, all that kind of fun stuff. I'm a huge geek, so.
And we had, and I probably should bring this up, but those listeners heard Sam disparaged my Buffalo Sabres on many an occasion, and we finally had to get rid of him. And the only other Sabres fan that I know of, at least in the general vicinity, is my son Daniel. So we fellow sufferers together, and for the cause.
Yeah, I'm sure that will come up. Support sessions between the two of us. But I'm excited for this series. I know that, like you said, Dad, this is something that. I know just as someone, as your son, I've heard you for years just telling people that, you're a leadership expert. You talk to leaders all over the country, different roles. And I know I can't count the number of times I've heard you just tell people, the most important, crucial leadership role is in the home. It's being a parent, it's being a husband, being a wife, just the family. That is it's maybe not as glamorous or looked at as much, but that is such a crucial role for any leader, maybe unsung. And I know even just as someone that, I do a lot of cultural stuff for the ministry, look at stuff, and that is a theme that you see everywhere. I know about a year or so ago, I wrote an article just looking at, a span of about 10 movies, big blockbuster movies that I had seen and reviewed for our collision ministry. And I think 9 of the 10 had a clear theme of fatherhood. It's an issue I think that our culture is really wrestling with. There's a lot of broken families, a lot of just how do we deal with the family? How do we be a parent, a good parent? What do we do if we don't have good parents? All that stuff. So I think this would be a fun series. I know we come at it in different angles. But for
And
this first one,
I was going to say, and I just in all my travels and speaking with leaders, I work with very successful high level leaders. They may be pastoring a mega church. They may be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. They can work miracles when they get to work, but they get home and it's like they were Superman at work. They're Clark Kent when they walk in the door, and all of a sudden they've lost all the superpowers. And without a doubt, the most heartbreaking thing I hear over and over and over again are very successful leaders in the marketplace, in the church, but then they've got an adult child that hasn't spoken to them in 2-3 years, and they can't seem to build a bridge. They don't even know what's wrong sometimes, and yet they're estranged, or they've got a prodigal child. They've got children that they raised in church, and now they want nothing to do with God, and it's just heartbreaking. And so it just comes up over and over again for me as I work with leaders. They'll say, I've got a challenge in my home with one of my kids, or maybe in their marriage. And so I just thought it doesn't hurt just now and then to come back. And I've also just found if you can be really successful in your business, but if you're experiencing failure at home, it robs you of all the joy anywhere else. And for me, if my kids were struggling or alienated from me, then I don't know that I'd have any joy from any other success I might have. So we just feel like it's just such an important leadership issue to come back to. And we just thought with Daniel coming on here and just our history and our shared experiences, it might be good just to lean in. We're not going to do a comprehensive study, but for the next 4 weeks, we've just got several kind of key things about parenting and leading in the home, whether it's with your spouse, with your kids, building a culture for your family and so on, or maybe just even recovering from mistakes you made earlier on. Is there hope? We'll be taking a look at that for the next 4 weeks.
Yeah, and to start off this first week, we can jump right into it as far as just
Sure.
focusing on parenting, as whether you're a father, a mother. What do you do with your children? How do you raise them in a way that is setting them up for success, to honor God with what they do? Obviously, you have a son like me, so you must have done a lot of things right, Dad, to help me flourish. So maybe just to start off, and we can get into some more practical specifics, but just the big question is this: how do you lead your child to flourish?
Yeah, because that's ultimately what you want, right? That's, I think, in a sense, how you define even your success is, are they flourishing? And of course, from a Christian perspective, to us, flourishing would certainly be that they walk with God, that they find joy in family and relationships. But I think even more than that, also, it's that your child is flourishing as the person God made them. So however God wired them, whatever passions God gave them, skills, they found a way of an outlet for that. And that's the goal of every parent. And so that's but a lot of times that doesn't happen. And I tell you, when I see a lot of young people today on the news marching angrily, shouting all kinds of curses and espousing violence toward those they don't like, I just think sometimes somewhere these kids took a wrong turn, because that doesn't look like flourishing to me. That looks like anger, hopelessness, rage, and you just think, what happened there? And so, what kind of related to that though, Daniel, is that, and one of the things I think is interesting about this discussion, having you involved, is you have twins, and they're fraternal twins. They're my oldest grandsons, but they're totally different. And so you could parent one way where one of your kids flourished, but with that same parenting style, the other kid didn't. And it's kind of interesting. But also, kids are wired differently. So sometimes kids are wired one way, and there's nurturing, and then there's nature. There's the genetics that every child is born with, and then there's your parenting. It's you're trying to steer them in the right direction. And one of the big questions I have for parents sometimes is, should you even try to parent against the way they're wired? So maybe you got a child he's just very sedentary, just loves to sit and read books, but you kind of want them to get some exercise. So Do you enroll them in the track team at their school, or do you just say, they're not wired that way, so I'll just get them a library card they can read all the time.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, having twins as being, I mean, that's a challenge of, we've raised these kids the same, but they aren't the same. They're very much unique individuals. And I know for me, and I think you can have more to speak on that too, Dad, is the two things for me is you got to know where you're trying to lead them. You got to know what is flourishing for my child and what does that look like in their life. But I think you also have to know who the kid is, because like
Yeah.
you said, they're gonna need different things in order to get there. I think if you just focus on who the kid is and you don't know where you're taking them, or you just focus on this is where I want my kid to get, and he won't listen to the way I'm trying to get him there, then you're just sort of setting yourself up and your child up for failure. So what would you say? How do you, because genetics are a reality. Kids are wired a different way, but there's also in order for them to flourish, sometimes we got to encourage our children to transcend beyond that. What have you learned just, as raising us as children, or how do you sort of get over some of that, their wirings in order to get them to where they need to be?
Yeah, and a lot of it I think depends on what the wiring is. If you have a child that's very introverted, just wants to sit in their room all day and read books, you know that okay, that's fine. You're going to probably always be not necessarily going to parties every night, but you do need to socialize, and you need to have some kind of circle where you're interacting with others, or you do need to get out and get your heart rate up and exercise somehow. You may not go play on the basketball team at school like your sister, but you got to find something. Maybe you do long distance running because you can be alone still, but and so you can't. I think you can't just. I know a lot of parents who kind of give up on nature sometimes and just say, don't worry, my kid is quite overweight, but they're just so sedentary. I guess they're just going to be obese. It's like, well, no, you got to push back on some of that nature if it's affecting their health for sure, whether it's emotional health or physical health. But then there's other things where it's just don't try to make them someone they're not. If it's not a health issue, it's just that they're not behaving the way you did when you were a kid, or like their brother or sister does. Embrace kids that are different. We were blessed with 3 kids, all 3 of you very different. I don't know how 3 kids could all be so different from one another. And yet we had to just say, yeah, but we did this, and our oldest child, Mike, thrived and flourished, but Daniel, he's going to need something else. So, okay, well, we'll shift and we'll pivot and we'll give Daniel that. And then we have a daughter, and we got to do it entirely differently again. And that's part of parenting, and that's part of leadership. Leaders don't say, well, this person's not responding well to my leadership. You have to kind of say, well, I guess I need to adapt my leadership, modify it somehow for this one, because I want everybody in my care to flourish, not just the ones that respond naturally to what I do.
Yeah, and I think that that leads right into a second question that for us to get into is how do you relate to a child that is very different from you? I know you have 3 kids. I think of your 3 kids, me and you are probably the most different. That we've had to wrestle with this the most of my siblings. But how do you as a father, as a mother? I think sometimes it's maybe easier to understand and lead a child that thinks like you would think, and you understand how they're wired, and what motivates them, because that was what motivates you. But how do you do that with a child that is wired very differently than how your own way of seeing the world?
Yeah, and that's a question I've had a lot of parents really wrestle with, because I knew a man one time. He had 2 kids. One of his kids just was nothing like he was, and the other one just kind of really resonated. And so he just almost just gave up on the one and just would say, okay, well, this child doesn't want to come with me hunting and fishing and, four-wheeling, but the other child does. So I guess I'll just spend time with that child. And I remember trying to encourage this person to say, well, and he would say, I just have nothing in common with that child. But as a parent, you can't stop there. You have to say, well, right now we have nothing in common, but I'm going to have to work at that. I'm going to have to figure that out. And it is interesting, because as you said, you and I probably of the kids, or the least alike, just naturally. We're wired totally differently. I'm a firstborn, so in some ways I'm act a little bit more like my firstborn child. Um, but I remember coming to that point of saying I've got to figure out somehow I've got to be able to connect. And I remember back in the day when you were like a teenager, you'd like to play a lot of video games and stuff, which I never liked doing, and I was never any good at it because I didn't practice at it. But I would play just literally just to spend time with you. I would play the hockey video game, and I would always be the Buffalo Sabres, even though on the video game they weren't the best team by any means. And you would beat me every time, and you had certain secret special moves that you never showed me how to do. And so if I ever did get in the lead, you'd always throw one of those special moves at me and beat me and score a late period goal. But I did it, and I don't know if you enjoyed that or you probably just endured it.
Oh, I enjoyed it. All right. Yeah.
But I just thought to myself, well, and I remember in that you as a teenager you had a time and you were going through some hard times, but you followed the San Francisco Giants baseball team, and so I knew nothing about them. I'd never watched them, but I just thought, you know what, that's something that I can learn. And so we kind of kicked it off one time. It was really your mom's idea, but I took you down to San Francisco for three days. We watched a 3-game homestand, and I'd never watched them play. They had Barry Bonds back then. They were an exciting team, and we just had a lot of fun. And as a dad, I remember just very intentionally trying to build bridges. And, over time, if you build bridges and just find something, I got the San Francisco Giants app so I could follow along what was going on and read up about their players. And I was just determined we will have some things in common. It may not come naturally, but that doesn't mean you still can have bridges with a child that's different than you. And so, boy, I tell you, I'm sure a lot of our listeners have at least one child that they don't naturally just have an affinity. It doesn't mean you don't love that child. You don't care about them. It's just that your natural response is probably the opposite of what their natural inclination is. And so you have to work at it a bit more. And some people think, well, it's not real love if you have to work at it. And I would say, no, that's an expression of love. You love your child so much, you're willing to do whatever it takes to build bridges with each one of your kids, because you want them to flourish and you want to be a part of their lives. And so you sort of like the incarnation, God comes down and he finds a way to connect with humans, and he identifies with them. And I think sometimes as a parent and as a leader, you've got to find ways to do that too.
Yeah, and I would add too, just as our relationship together, and now as a father with children, trying to relate to them as they see the world differently, is that I don't think me and you still don't see eye to eye on everything. We're still, our wiring hasn't necessarily changed, and I think the goal isn't necessarily just that now we're gonna like the same kinds of music or always see that we're gonna meld into one indistinguishable. We think the same way. I think kind of what has helped us and helped me with my own kids is treating the goal more as just, I think, developing respect that, hey, I know my dad's, you're not going to see things exactly as I do, but we've earned sort of respect with each other that we can trust that, hey, but you see it in a way that's valuable, even though it's different than me. And although I can't maybe understand exactly how you see it, or you can't understand how I see it, I think a healthy, parent-child dynamic is just having that respect of valuing that and making sure that both sides know that they are valued. And maybe another question because a lot of this is based on understanding your child, understanding how they're wired, but a question of going too far with that. Like, how do you avoid, maybe putting your child in a box of, okay, this is the way this kid is wired. They are this. And now for the rest of their life, through their teenage years, through their adult years, like they are forever going to be sort of, trapped in, amber as this thing. How have you, because you've had more experience that as I have as being a parent longer, like, how have you learned to just adapt with your child and not just sort of put us into a box?
Well, I think it's such a curse, this whole thing we do socially where we're always wanting to put a label on everybody. It's just it's a lazy way of understanding people. If I can just put you in you're just the nerdy, the nerd, smart nerd, or you're the jock, or, you're whatever, you're the party boy, or you're the kind of lazy, unmotivated, like whatever box it is, then I don't have to really get to know you. I don't have to be aware of the nuances of your personality. It just now I don't have to think. I've got this labeled already. And so I think sometimes we have to fight against that kind of natural inclination to do that. And especially I think with your kids, and as your kids are growing up, you may have one and you say, well, he's the athlete of the family. Or I've heard parents say, oh, she was the good looking one or he was the smart one. And so you got the smart one, you got the good looking one, you got the athlete one. And now everything goes through that filter and that grid. And maybe it's easy for you to keep track of each of your kids, but I think you rob them. I don't know that they're ever going to fully flourish if you've got them pigeonholed that way. And there may be some that are, they are more coordinated, they're a faster runner than their brother, whatever. They certainly could, some could be better than the other. Someone gets straight A's, the other one gets A's and B's. But that doesn't mean they're dumb. It doesn't mean that they're not smart. It just means that their strengths kind of are spread out differently. But it's been fascinating watching your two kids, because especially twins. I'd never been so close to twins before, but the exact same age, exact same. They've been in the same class all through school, same teachers, same parents, same church, everything the same, and yet just they're both personalities. The way you have to kind of deal with them is fascinating. And I won't say which child, but when you drove me right to the limit as a parent, I did pray, say, God, in your justice and righteousness, would you give Daniel a child just like him so that he can be blessed as I was raising him. But how, when you've got kids, your kids could easily fit the stereotypes in some ways. And yet I know you've kind of worked hard not to just say to the athletic kid, well, your brother's the smart one, but you're a really good runner. Like you don't want to say that to your kids.
But yeah, that is, I think a lot of parenting is sort of that countercultural of that is they live in a world that's going to be very quick to slap labels on them. And, at school, like both my twins have come home with some of those questions of, I'm the smart one, I'm the academic one, he's the athlete. And a lot of parents is just pushing it. Well, like you can be an athlete too, or you're smart too, or you can be academic, that you're not defined by any one thing. And I think maybe another angle to that too, that I know I've had to, in some ways is almost harder. It's difficult to relate to a kid that's different than you, but in some ways there's some dangers of kids that are the same as you. Like I know me and you, Dad, are very different. Me and Mom are much more aligned personality wise. And I think there can be a tendency to, well, they're so much like me that you can also place them in a box of they must be thinking just like I do in all situations,
Yeah.
or you still lose some of that individual, nature of who they are, and you assume you understand how they would think or how they're feeling because you think of your own self. And I think kind of on both ends of that, whether your kid's different, whether your kid's the same, there is sort of that intentionality that's needed to avoid just assuming that you figured them all out and you don't need to
Yeah.
continue to sort of grow with them.
Yeah. Don't take shortcuts in your parenting. You can't use shorthand. People are far too complex for that. And I just think you shortchange them when you start just making assumptions about them instead of really listening and paying attention to them. I would just add, kind of even to the previous point, just real quickly, you and I are very different. And so oftentimes your first reaction to something is totally opposite to what my first reaction would be. And often, like it used to be often with your mother, I would just disagree initially. But one thing I learned with her and with you is instead of immediately just kind of saying something that just discounted your opinion because it wasn't like mine, what I did learn just over time was if I listened carefully, oftentimes there was a lot of truth in what you were saying. You might be seeing it from a different vantage point. That didn't mean it wasn't true. And I learned so much from you and your mother both by just not discounting right away, but saying, okay, I'm not seeing what they're seeing, but they tend to see stuff that if I look at it long enough, I begin to pick up and I gain so much from that. And so, yeah, especially when it's someone who's different than you, I've just learned the same way, even with a child that's different. Before you just put them in a box or try to simplify things, just come to really celebrate and appreciate and tease out some of the beautiful things that God may have put into their character, into their very genetics. And as a parent, you want to bring all that out of them. You don't want to suppress it or lop off all the edges so that they fit into a box that you've designed for them.
Yeah, and I think that is the the end goal of leading a family, leading children, is to help them develop into who they need to be. Not just sort of what we hope they would be or want in our own sense. Maybe we have a couple more minutes. Maybe just to end, as you, someone that have led the house, raised three, at least one very good child, and then two other ones. What are some, like, how do you sort of set some expectations? What were some of the expectations that you set just as a parent with multiple children in the house, that were sort of the non-negotiables, or just practical ways that you could help sort of set the guidelines for how we could go forward?
Yeah, and of course, and we actually, I wrote a book called Rebellious Parenting with my daughter Carrie at one point, and one of the chapters was about what rules you set. And as Carrie and I were trying to think of those, I couldn't think of very many rules. Maybe you could think of more. I mean, we didn't have a bedtime. We didn't really have curfews. Like I was actually, I'm embarrassed at how few rules we had for you guys. We focus most on character and just thought if you have a godly, trustworthy, honest character, we don't need a lot of rules. But most of the rules we did have kind of focused around you and the way you related to your siblings. And so of course we just not tolerate arguing, fighting. I know some households that's just the norm. That's part of the culture is just constantly yelling and arguing and debating and criticizing, and we just stopped that right away, and just we didn't want that to become so toxic, and we wouldn't allow that. But maybe just, well, certainly one other one was just we also expected you as siblings to support one another. And so if your sister had a ice skating competition, you were in the stands, cheer. And if she had all of her little girlfriends over to a birthday party, you and Mike were expected to be there. And oftentimes we'd do some little fun skit or something, and you guys would have to participate with all of her little girly friends. And but then she was expected to be there in the stands cheering you on when you were playing sports. And it was not the kind of thing was, well, that's his thing, that's not my thing. No, it's your siblings are your thing, and just trying to build it into to the family, to say family matters, family's important, and you support them and cheer them on, and it's not a competition. Our kids weren't twins, so you were 2 years apart from your brother, and you were far enough apart. I think at least certainly for the early years, you didn't really see yourselves as rivals. I don't know you ever really did, but to say, no, if your brother has success, you cheer him on, and he'll do the same for you. And that's been very gratifying, even to this day, to see the three of you try to support each other and love each other's kids, and just celebrate when one succeeds. But a lot of, and we may talk a bit more about creating culture in a different podcast, but that kind of stuff creates culture when you say, this is the way our family treats each other. And these are the things we don't tolerate, we won't put up with. And I don't know what sort of stood out to you as you were growing up in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, that was always yeah. It's hard to think of many strict rules you had. I'm sure I broke the ones that you did come up with. Or maybe
We
you
just
just.
thought the fewer rules we have, the fewer that Daniel can break.
But I know that even as I've become a parent myself, that has been the big takeaway, is that family is important and worth working together, and we support each other. And I mean, even just as a father of twins, where it's hard. You have to be intentional to avoid the comparison because they're literally taking the same tests and competing in the same gym, activities and on the same sports teams at the same level. And so it's just by nature, they're going to be compared to each other. And I just think, one of the things I'm glad that you never did as a parent was ever make us feel like we are competing for your affection, but also competing against each other. And I know that's one of the main things that I've tried to instill in my kids is that, if one of us succeeds, we're going to celebrate that. We're not going to, downplay it to try and save everyone's face. We are one unit as a family, and we can, we're going to celebrate whenever there's a success, and we're going to hurt when
Because
there's a hurt.
I know that's a challenge for some because it's like, well, this child plays softball, so if we brag about the fact that he hit a home run, this child here that's in the chess club might feel like they're, somehow neglected but I don't think you want to go to that place where you can't ever celebrate successes because someone else might feel left out. That's a hard one sometimes. And some of your kids may be more gifted than others and have more successes, but you can't just sort of not celebrate, or you got to find a way to truly just be happy for whatever your children are doing at whatever level of success they're having.
Yeah, and a lot of that is like you tease. I think next week we're going to look at just how do you develop a family culture as a leader? How do you set that culture? And obviously, a lot of that is siblings and those dynamics. But at a broad level, how do you just establish that? So I'm excited to get into that next
Yeah,
week. Obviously, there's a lot we could have talked about with parenting, but it's been fun to just look at this.
it
I
has.
think the important thing is just that I think the intentionality of I don't think any parent has all the answers. Every kid's different. It's going to require different things. But I think one thing we can all do is just be intentional and ask those questions.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So,
great. Yeah. Look forward to next week and digging in even deeper.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.